Hello and welcome to this new episode of VistaTalks. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here in Studio 2 today of VistaTalks with the Chief Technology Officer of Vistatec. We've been trying to get him on the show for quite a while. He's a very busy man, but we're absolutely delighted you can join us here today, and I'm going to introduce you to CTO Phil Ritchie. Phil, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Surrounded by lots of electronics.
Yeah, absolutely, with microphones and cameras and recording decks and everything. Thank you so much. Phil, I'm delighted that you're here. We really want to get into some of the topics we're going to touch on today. Before we do that, maybe you could just take a moment and just share a little bit about your role at Vistatec, what you're involved in, and a little bit about your career to date.
Sure, okay. Well, I've been in the industry way longer than I want to think about. But it's been good. I've enjoyed it. I have kind of two responsibilities within Vistatec. One is I direct all of the technologies and strategies around technologies that we use to interface with our customers. So that would be things like translation management systems, collaboration environments, machine translation, all those kind of exciting things. And that aspect is supported by a team we call the Applied Technology Group. That team gives us an internal development capability, which is very good. Allows us to be self-deterministic in things. You know, we can build things that we need quickly. We can do integrations with customers and do lots of nice things there. And then the second aspect of my role is to direct kind of research and development activities, because over the last number of years we have done quite a lot of pure research type things within the localization industry, obviously, but looking at things like natural language processing, machine learning, machine translation, all those lovely things. And I look after that aspect too.
But I want you to start by giving us some context, if you will, for maybe some people that are newer to the industry, and also a bit of a memory lane trip for people who are using XCliffe on a daily basis. What is it about all these formats? Where did it come from? What's the background? How widely is it used today? Give us a bit of context, will you?
I'm old enough to have forgotten most of these things. So I think probably the best place to start is way back in the noughties, a group of localization service providers and customers were looking for a way to make the localization process a bit more interoperable. So, a customer might have documents in Word format or InDesign format or any number of kind of DTP formats, and they wanted to simplify the localization process so that rather than everybody at every stage in the workflow having to understand what an InDesign document is or what a Word document is and have to know which parts of that file are translatable, this group of people came up with this idea that they would create a standard which would define a file format which could be moved through the localization process. So the idea is that you take your source document, you convert it to what became known as XLIF.
Yeah.
XLIF goes all the way through your workflow tools, and everybody would then have standard tools to work with it. And then when all of those localization operations have finished, you convert your XLIF back to your Word doc or back to your InDesign document. And this was this was the goal, and they wanted to have this format standardized and open so that everybody could understand how it works and not have 10 different tools to keep doing the same things. So this happened, and I think as I say, at that time the the technology of the day, or the file format of the day, was XML.
Yeah.
And so XLIF was written in XML.
Yeah.
And I think the first version was published in like 2001 or something.
Okay.
And I guess it took a while for some people to adopt, but over the years, it's got better and better. There was a very long period between version 1 and what is now version 2. You have to remember that a lot of this effort is driven by volunteers as well. So people have their day jobs and they kind of do this as an interest.
Understood, but really came from a position of how do we make this easier for everybody? I mean, there was obviously a problem there that needed to be fixed.
Yeah.
This format sort of helped the process in the localization journey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And everybody, all of the localization service providers have their own different tools internally. And it just means that if you have this one format, you can share, you can move the file from one LSP to another, or one customer department and another. And
today, Phil, widely adopted, used by a lot of companies.
I honestly couldn't say what the percentage adoption rate is. We certainly use it in Vistatec, and our open source editor, just called Ocelot,
right,
which is freely available up on GitHub. It supports both the XLIF 1 and the XLIF 2 standards. So,
okay. So you touched on something new there. So the Ocelot, which I know has been around for a while now and has been growing in its adoption.
Yeah.
Could you maybe just take a moment, and just for people that aren't maybe as aware of it, just tell us a little bit about Ocelot and where that came from, what that's doing for the industry too, because that's really interesting.
So when after the publication of XLIF, which accommodates the kind of core standard bits of the localization process. Myself and an extended group of people were interested in being able to add other information. So perhaps I would like to capture who the translator was that edited this file, or maybe a particular tool was used to QA the file. And we wanted to add that information into the XLIF. So we joined a European Commission funded project, a group of 10 companies. And that project was funded to look at standardizing how that kind of information could be added to XLIF. And Ocelot came out of that research project because we not only wanted to define a standard, but we wanted to test that standard in a real working environment. So we basically built Ocelot to support XLIF plus these new extensions that we were designing. And that was a really good idea, because it enabled us, by the time we launched the standard, we knew that there were tools that had already tested out this idea.
Okay.
So we figured.
Quite a lot of development went into that. I mean, it was a group of quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
The European Union are sort of behind it. I mean, it's a pretty big project.
It was a significant investment in effort and time. But we felt that it would be a good thing and probably help to drive adoption if there was a tool there that people could use and play with and investigate and evaluate. So we made that step to open source it. Now we use it internally. We use it for some of our biggest accounts, and we actually do use its ability to capture this additional information. So, for example, when we're doing linguistic QA, Ocelot is able to capture all of the information about what errors were in the file and how serious those errors were, and collect all that data together. So it's
an extremely useful tool.
It's pretty cool, even if I say it myself.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about, because industries move on, technology moves on, file formats, standards move on, and obviously given your role as the Chief Technology Officer in Vistatec, you're involved in lots of new areas. But I wanted to touch now, maybe, let's talk about JLIF now and where this comes from, what's the thinking behind it, where you're at with it right now, because this is a new, exciting point in time, really, for the industry, isn't it?
Yeah. So XLIF XLIF was very successful in that almost kind of industrial phase in localization. So we had this robust format that we could move through a localization workflow and through a translation management system. But obviously, probably since the mid to late noughties, people wanted to start communicating over the internet.
Yeah.
And the predominant format, because everyone was using browsers, those browsers predominantly were driven by JavaScript, and so people were using a format to communicate between browsers and servers called JSON, which is kind of native to browsers. JSON is a slightly less verbose file format, so it was obviously designed to be quite small, so that these conversations happening over the internet could be done very efficiently. So with the prevalence now of localization service providers and customers having these web services or these computers that people want to talk between. So my customer wants to send me files to my server, and my server wants to send back pricing information to the customer server. XLIF is kind of chunky to do that. It not only is it quite verbose, but it has quite a strict structure in how you have to write them out.
Yes.
And again, that can kind of add to its verbosity. So as people like Gala are now starting to define standards that allow this localization web services, people to post files between customers and service providers. Service providers want to post data between their servers and MT engines, those kinds of things. I think people have been looking for a nice format to do that in. And so, as a member, XLIF is published by a standards body called OASIS, which is the Open Architecture. We'll look that up. But they have, they're the publishing body of XLIF, and I have been a member of their technical committee for a while, and that technical committee wanted to look at designing other ways of writing XLIF, and of course this is where the hookup with JSON came in. So instead of having XLIF, which is kind of synonymous with XML, we decided we'd have JLIF, which is synonymous with JSON, and JLIF is basically XLIF written in JSON.
Very good.
Make it that simple.
Very good. And where is it at in its development now then? So when, you've been working on this for a little while now.
Yeah, I think we've been working on it for about a year, and we think that we have kind of a complete draft, and we're kind of, I guess the next phase would be to publish that and look for public feedback, criticisms. Have we just got it completely wrong, or people see the logic,
the benefit,
yeah. And my involvement has, as well as having involvement in kind of the design aspects, my prime role was that I wanted to do a bit like we did with Ocelot, where we write tools that implement this standard as we're designing the standard. I took the same role, and I was writing code that uses JLIF even before JLIF is kind of finished, with this notion that we would, at the point that we go to publish it, we know it has some foundation and it works, and we're not going to hit a stumbling block on day one of release.
Yes.
And again, like Ocelot, we decided that maybe it would be good to help drive adoption if these things are kind of known as reference implementations. We thought it would be good if people could evaluate JLIF easily, and so the code that I've written we open source as well, and people can kind of see what JLIF is and evaluate it. One of the nice things that we did was wrote a converter that converts XLIF to JLIF and back again, because probably people actually have a lot of XLIF files already.
Yeah.
So the first thing they probably want to do is, so what does this look like in JLIF? So
you've built already this JLIF to XLIF converter that's available in the GitHub repository, I'm assuming,
exactly,
and that people can download that today.
Yeah. Now, so if you download the code, obviously you have to be technical enough to,
of course,
to know how to build the code. But we have also deployed a website where you can do both of those things: convert JLIF to XLIF and back again. And again, I think that's helping people as we start to evangelize what JLIF is, gives people an opportunity to try it out and see.
Very good. And what are your hopes for JLIF, Phil, if I can ask you that? Like, if you just shoot forward a few years, I mean, where do you see JLIF?
So the things that kind of piqued my interest when the discussions about JLIF first happened was, it's kind of a format that's very prevalent on the web, and Vistatec we use a whole ton of automation and cloud-based robots. So it's a format that we were just looking for something that we could use for this communication. And the second thing is that I mentioned XLIF has kind of quite a strict hierarchy in the way that you have to write it. And one of the things that we decided with JLIF was that we would allow some of that hierarchy to be circumvented. So, for example, when a customer wants to send me a file for translation, they probably want to include a lot of information so that we can be very complete and understand exactly what needs translating. But when me as an LSP sends text to a machine translation system to get a translation, I don't need all of that extra data. I just want to basically send a string in English and have it sent back in the language. So one of the things that JLIF allows is to basically flatten down this hierarchy, and you can be quite terse about what a JLIF document looks like.
Okay.
So
extremely useful.
So we could see. I could see immediately where we could use that in these kind of communications with machine translation systems, for example, and actually we have implemented it quite fully in some machine learning that we've been developing. So we have a server that does the machine learning part, and then you can have say a desktop tool, a desktop editor, let's say Ocelot for the sake of argument, and maybe I want to the document that I'm working on in Ocelot, maybe I want to send that to the machine learning to QA it for me. So we basically use JLIF for that conversation. Ocelot sends the JLIF document to the machine learning system. Machine learning system adds lots of information about what's wrong with that document and then sends it back again. So it's pretty good.
That sounds really good.
Now, we're probably a little bit crazy because, I'm telling you that we've implemented it in kind of production grade tools, and this thing's not even released yet, right? So
you're a little bit ahead of yourself there. Yeah. But it sounds like you're already using it in real world situations.
Yeah, I think we've kind of kicked the tires well on it.
That's great. And then, so in terms, you mentioned machine translation there, of course, and you mentioned the GitHub repository where people can access this, but you've been involved in open source and software for quite a while, Phil. So I'm thinking back to deep content, I'm thinking back to other tools that you've built and outsourced. Maybe you could just touch on some of the things that you've been involved in, because they're interesting.
Yeah. So, in a way, I'm having open source. Can be a difficult proposition to make to management. You're saying, hey guys, we spend a lot of time doing this. We should give it away for free. Yeah. So you can imagine what the CFOs and CEOs think of that conversation. So for a long time, we were users of open source tools because they're free. They're really awesome. Yeah. And usually you find that tools built by a wider community are actually better than designed by a narrow company. So I think we had that open source conversation about Ocelot probably around 6 years ago, and it did take quite a bit of deliberation to convince management that this was actually a very good thing to do, and that in a lot of circumstances you're not just giving something away, because if you get a community behind it, the community contributes to it, and so
everybody benefits ultimately.
Yes. To benefit of everyone really. So having had that debate with management at Vistatec, and got the people to realise this is actually a good thing to do. We've been doing it a lot more since then.
And really championing that space. I think.
We have tried to do that as often as possible. Sometimes definitely, like even with Ocelot, there was kind of linked components of Ocelot that included some IP that we did want to protect and we didn't want to let go. But within open source projects, you can kind of structure them such that that's not an issue, and you can protect those. So we definitely do sometimes keep bits to ourselves. But Ocelot is out there and includes, like I say, a lot of good techniques for doing things over and above what standard XLIF does. In terms of deep content, we didn't open source deep content itself. We felt that there's a revenue opportunity there for us. That's a service that we wanted to provide. But essentially, all of the clever things that deep content does are built on open standards. So again, although we didn't specifically open source something there, all of the standards that it's built on are open source and public. So we felt that was
a good thing to do. Could you just maybe take a moment just for people maybe in the audience that are listening that have not come across deep content? Could you just give us a quick synopsis of deep content and what? Because I've seen it. It's a phenomenal tool. So it would be helpful if you could just share maybe a few thoughts on deep content. So
deep content is kind of our brand name for an avenue of technology which people like Common Sense Advisory call automated content enrichment. So it's this idea that in addition, in a way it kind of comes back to the design principles of Ocelot, that we wanted this additional information. So it's based on the idea that, as well as information that's visible to you on a web page, for example, there could be a lot of hidden metadata, metadata being kind of supplementary information that's perhaps not visible to you, but it adds to the intelligence of that document as a whole. So, for example, in simplistic terms, the author of the document, when it was authored, information like that could be classed, as metadata. But what we decided to do with deep content was to use the internet as basically a vast knowledge source, vast knowledge repository, and use some of these open standards, open techniques, such as something called RDF, which allows you to search the internet in quite a structured way. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, what if we know our document is talking about the Irish political situation? Why don't we, in background to somebody working on this document, go and look up information about this particular political movement or political context that's happening, and then display that to the user, display that to the author of the document or the reader of the document to give them additional context. So
if I'm writing or working on a document, I should say, and the topic could be anything. It could be an Irish political thing. It could be something about Brexit. It could be something about data privacy. It could be something about a particular well-known personality or celebrity. This tool literally goes out and pulls from credible sources the context. So the person reviewing that, if I remember it correctly, you get that brought right up onto the desktop where you're actually working, so you can make sure that the nuance and the understanding of what you're writing about is coming from those credible sources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you could have an acronym that's being used, and deep content can go find that acronym and tell you exactly what it stands for. If you're talking about a particular political leader, it's already been off to the internet and found kind of the authoritative page on who that political leader is, and give you background to that person. So it's really kind of a almost an immersive experience, but we decided that it could be a lot of value add in that when I'm translating a document, rather than have the finished product just being a linguistic conversion of that document, what if we actually embedded links to these additional information sources in that finished product? Wouldn't that be awesome, that we're giving back to the customer something more than they gave us in the first place? And so that was the kind of vision for deep content, that we could give people back documents that were far more enriched than what we had started with.
Yeah, really good. So it seems like, Phil, that just in terms of your strategy, your thinking, your engagement, you're pretty busy with, JLIF seems to be the latest thing, but I kind of get the impression that you're involved in quite a lot of forward-thinking activities and technologies with your Applied Technologies group here at Vistatec.
Yeah. I mean, I'm extremely lucky. I get to investigate lots of shiny objects as they pass by. But I'm also very conscious that you have to pick the right shiny objects to follow, and at the end of the day, we want to try and utilize these things in a productive way. So I suppose maybe that's why I'm allowed a little bit of freedom, is that I have been quite good about keeping myself on the straight and narrow. But yeah, and having the backup of the applied technology group here in Vistatec as well is kind of key to the level of service that we can provide, because it means that when we have quite a lot of customers who are working at this kind of bleeding edge, and I think it gives them a lot of confidence that when they talk to myself and my team, that we're kind of up there with them. We know the technologies they're talking about. We know about the conceptual opportunities that these technologies provide, and I think that helps when we're having conversations.
No, tremendously. I mean, I'm very conscious, Phil, that in your role as CTO, I mean, you speak at many conferences around the world. I know that you provide great input to the wider industry, and I think it's very admirable. And I'm truly inspired at the fact that not only, of course, you've got your Vistatec hat on, and there's the commercial elements to it that you've touched on, and it's great, but you're also giving things back to community. You're sharing things with the industry. You're sharing that knowledge, and that sort of cutting edge or bleeding edge, whichever terminology we want to use, but to be there at the forefront, to use that that sort of thought leadership, and to be able to push the industry and to drive new initiatives, I think is a fantastic position to be in. And it's really, really good to hear about all the things that you're involved in currently, and I'm sure there are other things that you're involved in that we just we're not going to get to today. But that's really good, and I'm very conscious you touched on things like working with global clients there, because some of those clients are very complex, very large organizations with very specific requirements. And I know you often talk about the technology agnosticism, but you also build a lot of solutions for these high-end clients too, where something is required. And I think that's where the ATG, Applied Technologies Group, really comes into its own.
Yeah, absolutely. Our strategy has always been to work with the best technologies available at the time, and to be agile enough that we don't end up with vast kind of legacy systems that restrict us, in that agility. So we've been very lucky to be able to, as they say in populist press these days, to pivot quite well when needed, to move systems, or to be able to adopt things simply because we felt they were the best solution for a customer, and to be able to fill in any gaps with our applied technology group and build integrations and things like that. So we have done some nice stuff. Sometimes it's funny because we have things like deep content which have a bit of sizzle to them, but we actually have an awful lot of technology which just does the same thing day in, day out, and has done for the last 6 years, to the extent that most people have probably forgotten that they ever exist, because they just
they're so efficient. Yeah,
they do that job well, and they do it every day. And sometimes those things are quite nice to sit back and reflect on and think, that's been running for 3 years, and we've never had to do anything to it. It's just reliable and it keeps going. So those things are kind of interesting as well.
Yes. Okay. Well, Phil, I mean, it's absolutely great to talk to you. It's fascinating to hear of all the areas that you're involved in. I know that people who are listening to this and reading articles that you publish can catch up with you. I mean, you've only got to tap into this whole localization language industry, and your name will pop up somewhere on some conference event.
If you attend a show, you'll probably
You'll probably bump into, yeah. And I'm very conscious with the Think Global Awards coming up again this year, both in the USA and in Europe. We're down in Menlo Park and in Dublin, Ireland this year for the awards.
Nice.
And you've been a speaker many times at the Think Global forums, which I know are always really packed rooms and very well received. So, thank you for that.
Better start thinking of
we've more coming, for sure. And I know you're thinking of publishing some new blog articles, and I don't want to give away too many trade secrets, but I think if people want to follow you on Twitter or stay tuned to the Vistatec social media, there'll be some announcements there on something quite interesting that I think will be coming soon. Okay, so Phil, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to be joined by you today. Thank you for joining us here in Studio 2 at VistaTalks. Thank you so much, Phil. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.